Okay, right. Well, thanks very much for having me. It's very nice to be here. In a way, I'm very sorry to have missed all the talk this morning through being delayed, but it's also kind of interesting because I wrote this talk without knowing at all what anyone else was going to say. So you can all do a blind comparison between my thoughts and other people's. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a bit about the Space Warps project. That is a search for gravitational lenses. Here's an example of a gravitational lens. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll give you an introduction to the project and also a little bit to the science of gravitational lenses, but I won't spend too much time on that because I don't have much time. Then I'll spend some time describing how we estimate probabilities of images containing gravitational lenses, and you'll see lots of nice similarities between what Edwin showed earlier, which is cool. I'll show you the results so far and something of our plans for the future. I also want to say a little bit about implications that this project might have for how we do things with LSST, which I believe came up this morning too. Okay, so here are all the people that have worked hard on this project. First, the people with stars next to their names, they have stars because they are actually stars. These are the citizen scientists that helped us design the Space Warps project. And then we have my two co-PIs, Aprajita Verma and Anupita More. In fact, it was Aprajita who first started in Galaxy Zoo, working with the citizens to try and understand how a system for lens finding might work. Okay, so gravitational lenses. For those of you who have never seen one of these remarkable objects, here are a picture of three of them. Here's a faint blue galaxy in the distant universe, and here is something like that blue galaxy, but as viewed through a massive red galaxy. And you can see that the massive galaxy doesn't obscure the background blue galaxy, but instead distorts it and lenses it, magnifies it in much the same way as this wine glass base is doing to the candle flame behind it. So when we find these rare objects, that is, almost exact alignments of galaxies across the universe, we can use them to measure the mass in the lens galaxy. We can use the magnifying effect of the lens to study the distant universe. And we can also try and measure distances in the universe. So all very useful things to do in astronomy. And all of those science projects need more lenses. So we're in the business of trying to find more gravitational lenses. Okay, so here's a machine that should find us many, many lenses, LSST. I think you saw this morning from Chris, perhaps. I put some numbers on this slide, but we shouldn't dwell on this other than to realize that the LSST image archive will contain a lot of lenses. So thousands, tens of thousands of lenses in half the sky being surveyed to impressive depth. So the problem we have is how to find them once we've taken those images. Okay, so here's an experiment that we've been doing with the Zooniverse's help over the last year. This is the Space Warps website, where we introduce people to the idea of gravitational lenses and then help them find them in images taken from the CFHT legacy survey, at least to start with. And so we made 430,000 images, and this data set is important because those images have already been searched by automated methods. So we're interested in doing a comparison between what crowds of citizens can do and what robots can do. So we're looking for lenses of various different kinds, and the way we do it is Space Warps is a sort of, what's the word, a supervised learning system. So we have images of simulated lenses that we make as carefully as we can to look like the real thing. Here are some of simulated lenses in the Spotter's Guide here. And we also have duds, images that are known not to contain lenses. And we use that training set to understand, as best we can, volunteers' skill at finding lenses. Okay, so when we launched this in May, we had 2 million classifications in the first week. And then the first data set, we ran it over about 6 months, and in the end ended up with about 11 million classifications from about 30,000 citizen scientists at that point. And it turns out 40% of them, I think, have taken part in discussion and talk. You can't really read this very well, but if you go and look at the slides later, you'll see this is an interesting discussion on talk about can massive black holes cause lensing. So this is good because it's a research question. Okay, so making sense of the markers that we ask people to place on the lensed features. It's a rare object search, as I said at the beginning, And we're doing the simplest thing that works, which is to treat a mark placed as a yes, I think there's a lens there. And if you don't place a marker, then it means that you don't think there's a lens. So we have two sources of noise. One is the human volunteers who make mistakes, despite their best efforts. And then another source of noise is our interpretation of their classifications. So it's a mixture of those two things, and it's difficult to tease those two apart. The way we analyze these classifications in order to cope with these noise sources is that we assign each volunteer a software agent. So this is slightly different terminology than Edwin used. Edwin talked of volunteers being agents. For us, agent means it's a little piece of software whose job it is to listen to its own personal volunteer. So every volunteer gets an agent, and that agent then does the calculations.
So if you had 100,000 people, you'd have 100,000 instances of the code running then?
We have 100,000 instances of the agent object. Okay, so the agent listens to its volunteer classifying images and then just notes lens or not. And as it does that, it updates the two parameters that sort of define the agent, which are the probabilities of being right in the case where there's a lens there, probability of it being right, he or her being right when there is not a lens there. And so this is exactly the confusion matrix that Edwin showed a minute ago. And then once the agent has those probabilities in mind, it can then understand the classification that's made on a test subject as opposed to a training subject. Okay, excuse me, there was one more bullet here. Okay, the last bullet that didn't come up says, the reason we make the separation between volunteers and agents is basically so that we can blame the Bureau of Agents. So we learned from talking to the volunteers that one of the things that is difficult for them is to have their information that they've contributed be misinterpreted. And so we try and be upfront about how stupid our agents are. That is, we put all of our assumptions into the agent and then say, this is what we do. So it's a useful way of talking about the very simple assumptions we make. Okay, so each agent tries to describe its volunteer with just two numbers. And what I've done here is plotted them on each axis. Each of these points here is an agent. And on the x-axis, you see the probability of volunteers saying lens when there really is a lens there. And on the y-axis, you've got the probability of the volunteer saying there's not a lens there when there really is not a lens there. And so the agent might, because it only has two numbers, might try and make very simplistic characterizations of its volunteers. So for example, up here, you might think that the volunteer is astute because they get it right most of the time. Over here, you can see they're pessimistic, which is to say that they often think there's not a lens when there really is. And down here, they might be optimistic. These are the obtuse volunteers, the ones that always say the opposite of what there is there. And the way the agent calculates these probabilities is very simple. It just takes the ratio of the said yeses over the actual yeses and vice versa. Okay, so this is to say that the assumption that we've encoded in the agent is that the volunteers have talent for finding lenses, that they are only two numbers, and you can describe this complex human being with just two numbers. That's why I asked the question for Edwin about whether the volunteer was changing or the agent.
What's the size of the blob? Is that number of classifications?
Right, the yellow blob shows the number of classifications made, and the size of the green blob shows the amount of information being contributed. Which is one of the things I'd like to do this week, is take another look at that definition of information. Okay, so that was training the agents. Once those agents have some probabilities in mind, they can then approach classification of a test subject. And I've put up here the equation we use for updating the probability of an image containing a lens. And one interesting thing about this equation is Bayes' theorem. Is its symmetry. I should point out that the people who are obtuse down here are actually just as useful as the people who are as astute over here, it turns out, when you go through the math. Okay, so on the right-hand side here, I've plotted an example, some example subjects. Each of these dots is an image, and the x-axis shows the posterior probability for that image containing a lens. So over here we have SIMS in blue, that is, images that really do contain a lens, or at least a simulated lens, being correctly classified. And over here, you can't really see, but there are some red dots here, which are the duds that are being correctly classified. And all of these black points are unknown test images. And you can see they're mostly drifting to the left, to low probability, which is good because the first approximation, none of our images contain lenses. And then we do this updating the probabilities sort of online, which is why you can see trajectories coming down this plot as the number of classifications increases. And maybe you can read this. We see we need about 10 classifications per image to get to over our rejection threshold. Okay. Okay, so at Spacewalks we make decisions based on probability. We define this threshold here, and when a subject crosses this low probability threshold, we remove it from the stream, or at least we do in the morning when I run the code. On the right-hand side here, you see a detection threshold sort of put relatively arbitrarily at 0.95, but we don't remove those from the stream because we think it's nice for people to see lenses. Okay, so some results from stage 1 of this classification process. We found that with the SIMS, we were something like 93% complete. That is, we recover 93% of the SIMS that we put in. The 7% false negatives, when we look at them, they're very difficult to spot, so that's encouraging. And I suppose the main result is that out of those 430,000 images, the stage 1 classification process managed to reduce it to 3,381, which is to say that our crowd of volunteers is extremely good at rejecting non-lenses, which is great. That's the main thing, the main task. Okay, so 3,381 is too many images for me to inspect by eye, even if it is I don't know, a centi-Kevin or something. So we reconfigured the website, and to do a stage 2 classification, I put this slide up mainly to show how orange we painted the website when we were given control of the code. But maybe more importantly is that we did most of the reconfiguration ourselves, which I think is important for the future of things. We put in new training set. Pradeep did lots of work on the new Spotter's Guide, and then we set it going for another week to do a second round of classification with harder simulations, harder training, and so on. So from that stage 2 search, we found that there was a lot more noise here. You can see there are now subjects that are genuinely uncertain. It's genuinely unclear whether there is a lens there or not. That's okay. We can still make cuts in probability, decisions in probability, and we find that if we set the threshold of a detection threshold of 95% again, then we find something like 84 lens candidates, and many of those were the ones that were detected by the robots already, so that's good. And we find at least 12 new lens candidates, which are here. So these are the views that the volunteers saw on the website, and I put rings around them to help you out and to zoom in to help you out even more. So, new gravitational lenses found by a crowd assistance. Very exciting. Okay, so what's happening now? Well, there's still a little bit of activity on talk. We found that the investigations with the dashboard, that's the tool, were pretty popular, especially among the super users, including members of the science team. And so here's a good example. Here's a lens system where with the dashboard you can change the color scale and do a better job of making out that there is a counter image here. And you sort of need that to convince yourself that this really is a gravitational arc, not a spiral arc. We have this philosophy that to be a lens candidate you require a model to explain the image features. So for that we take the candidates coming out of Spacewalks and we go out to another website to do the modeling. Here's a modeling tool that Raphael Queng at the University of Zurich wrote. And the key thing about this tool is that when you get this results page showing details of the lens model and the predicted arc it's supposed to compare with the blue feature over there, there's this link here, revise this result. So when you click this, you're taken back to the modeling interface, and and allow to rearrange the model a little bit and then run again. So it allows groups of citizens to collaborate on lens models. And here they are in the talk forum. They figured out their own systematized way of talking to each other, which is good. And there's a Zooniverse letter on this in the offing. I think it was submitted and it's somewhere in the system. So we're hoping to scale up this process of citizens finding lens candidates, modeling them themselves, writing them up themselves in letters, and then in an ideal world, all we would do is come along and just read the letters. In fact, it's more fun than that, Space Warp, so we don't just do that. We go and hang
Is
out
there
and
like
talk
a
as well.
submission way that people could submit that to you if they didn't want to write like a whole thing? Like they were more nervous about writing it up. Is there a way you could submit that? Is that, or are you using Top basically to do that?
At the moment, all we have are the candidates with the comment thread underneath. What our plan is to start some sort of letter in the form of a completion exercise, questions to be answered about the system, and then just post that into the discussion thread, and then see what happens. That's an experiment to be done. Okay, so here's Capella 05's letter. Interestingly, she reduced it to 12 models that she couldn't distinguish between, and so just put them all in. And I like this plan because it gives you some sense of the uncertainty. We're not yet at the stage where I can tell you that these are actually samples drawn from the posterior PDF lens parameters, but that's maybe a worthy goal. Okay, so what did we learn? We learned that crowdsourced lens detection works, which is we can return over 90% completeness, and certainly a very high and useful rejection rate. We found a dozen new lens candidates, so that's another way we know that it works. And so far, what we can say about them is that they seem to have faint arcs and or confusing lenses, that is to say, exactly the kind of thing that makes life difficult for robots. Humans are better at understanding image features in context. Okay, we think there's a lot of untapped human potential remaining, so we're going to experiment with things like the lens modeling and detailed image inspection. And an interesting question for us is, how could we turn spacewalks into an unsupervised learning system? At the moment, it's fully supervised. So that's an interesting thing to think about. Right, so very quickly, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about our second data set. This happened in January. From the VIX82 survey, that's a project sort of led by Jim Geach at the University of Hertfordshire. We did something slightly different. Instead of just chopping up a sky survey into pieces and showing all the images, we selected 40,000 targets, that is, things that could be lenses or things that could be lensed, and just made cutouts around them. So in VIX82, everything interesting is in the center of the image. We reconfigured the website again, went back to the blue for stage one, had to remake the images. These are IJK images instead of GRI for the astronomers. And perhaps the key thing was that this data set was launched at the end of the first of the BBC Stargazing Live TV programs. So that was interesting. After 3 days, we found these three very good lens candidates. I'm not sure if you can see it very well, but this is a red arc here, and a pair of red images here, and another red ring system over there. So perhaps for me, the most interesting thing about this result is that these three lens candidates all have red lens features, but the training set that we provided all have blue lens features. So this is maybe some hint that Spacewarps is capable of operating in some sort of unsupervised way. That is, we gave a bad training set, and the citizens still managed to find the lenses.
Do you mention color at all in the tutorial?
I think we mentioned that they could be red, or maybe that the interesting ones were red. But all of the,
so they could be the color.
Yeah, but all the pictures we showed throughout the tutorial and the Spotter's Guide all have blue features. Okay, so here's everyone's favourite plot from January, which is the histogram of classifications per hour over the course of the first day. I think this, somewhere around 9 o'clock, was where
8:47.
8:47. So probably these are all in the 13 minutes after 8:47. And then this says 1 million classifications in the first hour. And it turns out that if we'd been able to cope with such a flux, this would have been enough to complete the project. Okay, so why did we manage to get so many classifications in the first hour? Well, I think the main thing was the popularity of the program, and particularly among the, it was a targeted program, that is to say, everyone watching was very into astronomy. So they were all keen to pick up their iPads and start classifying towards the end. And it, it helped that it had famous people and doing things to do with space, not just astronomy, that was on the program. And also there's this connection to the night sky that people find very appealing. And so it was very nice to see the combination of these things coming together to push people towards our citizen science project.
Was this year or last year?
This is this year. So I got all excited about this and started tweeting about it. And Amit Kapadia, who was our chief engineer on the development team, said, well, 1 million classifications is great, but how are you going to sustain this? Well, suppose we could sustain 1 million classifications per hour. It turns out that starts to make citizen astronomy with LSST very interesting. We could consider, for example, doing blind searches for things like lenses or perhaps something else that we're interested in all 20,000 square degrees. If you run the numbers for dividing up the survey, you find that you could, at this rate, go through that half the sky at high resolution in just 40 days. I guess people would have to give up TV or something for 40 days, but...
Ironically.
I was talking to Mario Juric, who is the project scientist for data management last week, and he said he thought about citizen science for transient filtering. And it's interesting because the LSST alert stream is going to be something between 1 and 1,000 alerts per image pair, that is every 30 seconds. So somewhere between 100 and 100,000 alerts per hour. And so we need something like 1,000 to 1 million classifications per hour to keep up. And this million here is if you don't do any brokering of the alerts, if you don't do any machine classification. Okay, and then I'm interested in the possibilities of general image investigation. Just show everyone the survey and see what happens. Certainly we could think about finding annoying artifacts or problems with the pipeline. We could ask people to mask things out that shouldn't be there. Certainly we know that crowds of citizens are very good at finding new things serendipitously. Okay, so how could we sustain 1 million classifications per hour? Let's get back to Amit's excellent question. Well, we were certainly entertainment powered in the VIX82 project back in January. And so I'm wondering whether we could provide an internet LSS TV station that could report on new discoveries, keep the interest high and the participation going as well. It's also interesting to think about LSST being a global project. There are now international partners all around the world. And so you could think of having this TV station run in different languages at different times and then get new waves of interest every day as the program went out on the internet. And I asked Mario, well, does the EPO office, the Education and Public Outreach Office at LSST Corp, do they think of themselves as human resources yet? And he said no, but perhaps they should. They could be very good at driving scientists our way. Okay, so what's next for Space Warps? Well, we're writing papers. We're writing them on GitHub so that, in principle, they're available for feedback from the collaboration. I haven't actually advertised the link yet, but at some point we will, which will be interesting. We're interested in doing comparison studies of humans versus robots. So that's a study that Anna Prito More will lead. And that'll be interesting to pin down this question of what kind of lenses are the citizens particularly good at finding. And then one of the things perhaps I'm hoping to do this week is analyze our Bureau of Agents a little bit, maybe in similar ways that Edwin showed earlier. And in particular, I'd like to know where is the information coming from? Is it the transient visitors or the residents of Talk? Okay, how far can this collaboration go? Well, we're looking for data sets now and have interest from most of the stage 3 surveys. So kids are interested, as are DES, PS1. Perhaps HSC would like to get involved as well. And at the moment, we're sort of limited by professional human power. We have plenty of citizens. It'll be interesting to develop Space Warp's labs a little bit to give more modeling options to the crowd. And so I'll stop there and take some questions. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask the first question as I can. when we first talked about spacewalks, or what became spacewalks, well, the task you were thinking about was finding the really unusual stuff. The idea that LSST's ridiculously large volume would give you a chance to find lenses that might be one-offs in that data set. Have you had any more thoughts about how to do that? Because it seems like the current spacewalk is a poor model for how you find the truly unusual.
Yeah, I think that must be part of the reason why I keep going on about needing to move to unsupervised learning. Certainly at the moment, our training set are not very exotic. That is, we're playing, for the numbers. On the other hand, there are volunteers out there who are good at finding exotic lenses and do know the kinds of things to look out for. And so there's some balance there between getting lots of false positives and finding the really interesting stuff. But I'd say that was, at the moment, still unsolved. But this transition from supervised to unsupervised is sort of key for that.
You said you started providing with extra tools to analyze the lenses. Did you see a dramatic change in your submission rate due to adding? Because obviously, as soon as you add that, it's going to take you much longer to analyze the lens than it would if you just didn't have that information. And also, you can have a lot more people playing around as well than using that.
I haven't looked in detail at numbers, but I can tell you stories. It seemed that there were a small number of super users that got very into the classifying, but then started to tire, and they were happy to find the opportunity to do some lens modeling instead. There's also a group of sort of very committed lensing aficionados, some of whom helped build the site, and they've been the ones that are most active with the modeling. And so I think I'm trying to think of this as sort of graduation process to attract people in with the thought of finding lenses, get them hooked with the classifying, and then be there with the modeling if they want to graduate to that. And so far it's worked in small numbers. I don't know how well that can scale up. Certainly I think it's true that when people move towards the modeling, they do less classifying. And so it's possible, well, I guess this is why I'm interested in the question of where's the information coming from, because if we are very dependent on a small number of super classifiers, then we'd have to think a bit about the timing of the modeling, but we'll have to see.
It may also, of course, change longevity as well, because you may hang around for longer.
Yeah.
Karen?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds quite similar actually to how we think about the Galaxy Zoo users, that we have some of the same names are our super users who like to do a lot of the more in-depth things. But that's not my question. My question was, you said there's information in the people who always get it wrong. There's obviously information in the people who always get it right. What about the pessimistic and optimistic people? Are they the ones where you're not getting information?
The pessimistic people are going to be very good at rejecting non-lenses. And since that's the bulk of the work, that's great. The optimistic people will tend to generate false positives, optimistically, but they'll also be good at spotting real lenses. And so, I mean, I think it's helpful to have all of those people.
So there's information in all four parts of that diagram, as long as you know where a user sits in that diagram.
Yeah, if I go back to that diagram very quickly. Oops. The only people who contribute no information to spacewalks are the ones with agents that sit along this diagonal line. And we call it the random classifier because if you're on this line, you're always clicking the same thing. Or one way to be on this line is to always click the same thing, yes to everything. And then you don't contribute any information. But the only people who are close to this line are people who have only done a small number of classifications. So most people, drift up here. It's good.
Kevin?
I'm really puzzled by your obtuse users. Because they have a positive task, is there a lens here? And when there is one, they deliberately click no. Have you talked to them? Do you know what they're doing?
No, almost on principle. I don't know who any of these people are. And it's partly because I don't really want to know where I am.
So could they be members of other lensing collaborations?
Well, that would be funny, wouldn't it? If they were trying to sabotage actually contributing information. I mean, I'm not very worried about it. I call them, you know, I say that their agents might say that they were obtuse, but really it seems that the people who are assigning this part of space just haven't done very many classifications yet. And so I think probably over time they'll drift back up here, but it would be interesting to take a closer look at that. There's very few of them.
Cliff.
Did you see a change in behavior, either in user engagement or in the data, when you went from a mode of more discovery in, I'm going to give you the full wide field, or tell me if there's a lens here in Base 82?
No, we haven't done that comparison yet, but it would be interesting. It'll be hard to control for things though, because I mean, when the first wave of volunteers that we had back in May were, you know, from the Zooniverse already, mostly from Galaxy Zoo, or they read about spacewalks in the newspaper, or heard it on the radio. We did a little bit of press release. The VIX-82 citizens are interesting because they came straight from Stargazing Live, so they were already engaged in astronomy, space science. They wanted to help, but it would be very interesting to compare those two populations and see what the differences are.
I mean, my personal interest in that answer is that, right, that is another way that we could do cluster identification. Is we have a machine algorithm that has high false positive rates. So our choice was we could give cutouts around all the candidates and say, is this a cluster or not? Versus do we just give the image? And honestly, we made the choice of just giving the image, I think, because that's what we actually ended up doing, in our first search, and so it's closer to what our first entry was. But I mean, I don't know the implications for making that choice one way or the other.
Yeah. I mean, we thought about, because we'd done the first project as blind, so the lens, if it's there, could be anywhere. We did wonder whether we ought to make the cutouts for VIX-82 the same way, that is, randomly offset from the position of the target. But in the end, we decided not to do that because we thought it was just more honest and also more informative to say the thing we're interested in is here. And we see some evidence in talk of people scanning the whole image anyway, because they want to find things.
Right.
So they don't just want to look at the target in the middle, they want to look everywhere.
They want to find the forward too.
Yeah. And we certainly have super users who, given a choice in the design of project, would probably say, let's just look at everything, because we might find something cool.
Good. Okay, I'm going to